On this episode of A Soul's Quest podcast, Omar and I are exploring the negative effects of not being aware of our blind spots and the consequences this has on our personal and professional well-being. Stay tuned. Hi.
Well, hello.
How are you?
I am well. How about you?
I'm good.
Yeah?
I'm excited about doing these episodes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. This is I think it's going to be a pretty cool episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote about this topic in my dissertation. So it's a pretty interesting topic because it's relative to leadership and individual leadership as well, right?
No, absolutely.
So in our professional and our personal lives. So
yeah. So what are we discussing?
We're
then?
talking about blind spots.
Blind spots.
What do you think blind spots are?
Blind spots are I think that obviously the things that we are unaware of.
Mm-hmm.
And things that we don't get to see about ourselves in relation to our own individual perception of ourselves, but also in relationship to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's things that we are able to recognize and see and things that we're not truly aware of what it is that we are doing or how we are affecting other people.
Right. And so and that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result of that, the consequences are how we affect other people and the consequences of that. And so,
also how we affect ourselves.
And also not having blind spots doesn't allow us to see our limitations and our weaknesses in terms of interacting with other people and in our leadership style within organizations and even in your personal life within your relationships and things like that. It can really affect you when you have blind spots and you're not aware of how you're treating that person in your family, your spouse, your significant other or whatever. So, but
also I think in the positives, because we also have blind spots in the positive things that we do, because a lot of us sometimes, speaking for myself, I need to make I statements. So speaking for myself, I know that there are times in which I devalue certain aspects of myself because I don't see those qualities as helpful or beneficial. So I think
that's a good point. Actually, I didn't write about that.
No, but typically we always look at things from the negative standpoint, right? And things that we are missing. But there's a lot of things that we do have and that we do possess that we are
blind
blinded
spots
to
is
that.
like a derogatory way of it's not derogatory because it is what it is, but it is not highlighting the fact that there are things that are very valuable about ourselves that are good qualities that we're not aware of that we have. I mean, we say it to each other all the time. Well, I'm not good at talking in front of people, or, I'm afraid of doing a presentation. And then I do a presentation. I'm like, I knock it out of the park, or I get good feedback or something like that.
Yeah. So there's aspects of those, because everything's dual.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
And there's things in which you got to be aware of those things. So, okay.
Yeah. And so, leadership isn't just about managing people. It also involves a level of self-awareness or a tremendous amount of self-awareness, actually, and emotional intelligence, which, self-awareness is that foundation of emotional intelligence and the ability to understand and adapt to different situations. But blind spots can hinder that. And I think it hinders it in the dual that we're talking about, because if you don't know the good qualities, then you're not emphasizing on those things. And if you're not aware of the negative qualities that you have, that also, causes a domino effect in terms of creating a toxic environment or an uncomfortable situation within your personal and your professional life.
So for me, right, because we gotta look at it from two standpoints, right? And then you're primarily focusing on the relationship of leaderships and in that environment of professional, right? I'm looking at it from the perspective on the individual, right? So there's this thing out there. It's called unconscious bias. The things that we are unconsciously biased about, that kind of like resonate within us, and you see it portrayed particularly like in culture wars and things of that nature, right? Right. But for me, yes, there's that. That there's things that we might do on unawares and the effect that we have on other people. But from the individual standpoint, the individual person, because you will focus on the leadership aspect, right? I'm going to focus on the individual.
But I want to make it clear that even though I'm focused on that leadership aspect, that's still an individual perspective.
No, yes, I get that.
Yeah,
I get
but
that.
I know what you're meaning. You're focusing more deeply on the individual.
Yeah, because again, it's like a leader is an individual, and leading others is based on leading individuals, right? So when I think of this particular topic, I start looking at from the one side of the negative unconscious bias, right? And what I mean by that is you start focusing primarily on the things that are doing incorrectly, the weaknesses that you might have, those type of things in which will hinder growth, personally. My trauma, my things, the blind in those aspects, right? I'm not good enough in this. I don't recognize that I might be doing taking certain actions and hurting other people. But also then it is the focus on the things that are working, right? Because we have a blind spot to that. And I want to emphasize on that. And I mentioned this kind of like repeating right now, but I want to focus on the things that we're not working. So I've been working on becoming a life coach, right? And so I'm going to the trainings and understanding that. And there's the SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? I forgot the T.
That's all right.
I always forget the T.
Don't forget the T. That's important.
and threats. But whenever traditional management always focuses on the weaknesses, right? But one of the things that we have to start looking at is really focusing on a lot of our strengths and the blind spots that we actually are having towards our strengths, because we don't put enough emphasis on it, because, this is part of what I do and I do this, whatever. So you minimize it instead of continuing to enhance it. So we do have a tendency to put blinders on that aspect of ourselves and focus primarily on the negative.
That's the unconscious bias that you're talking about, right? Kind of.
Well, not necessarily. Because unconscious bias goes more into the cultural differences and things of that nature. And then right now referring to it's primarily individually. So when you look at yourself, you got to also look at you should start looking at the things that are working for you and the things that you could actually enhance rather than the weaknesses, right? Yes, there are things that you could do better, obviously, and there's things that we're not able to see. But the more that you discover or you highlight your positives, the more that you're going to beginning to diminish and recognize areas in which you need to improve.
Do you?
I believe that you do.
So I would push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
And the reason that I would say that is because I think that when you focus on the things that you're doing really well and only focusing on the things that you're doing well, you're not really addressing your weaknesses or your blind spots because you're not aware of those. So I'm missing that point. If you're trying to make that point, I'm missing that, because in order for you to become better and grow and develop as an individual, let's talk about the individual, right? In both your personal and your professional life. So we'll talk about both, but from the individual perspective, if you're not addressing or recognizing those weaknesses or those blind spots, or not exploring that you might have these blind spots and be open to them, then you can't develop and enhance the positives.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Like, give me from your standpoint, which is because this is one of the things that you wrote about. Give me some blind spots that you feel are worthy of discussion.
So, some blind spots, I actually have some examples. Is the first and the most important thing is the lack of self-awareness.
Okay.
So lack of self-awareness is the it's a common blind spot. It's one of the most common blind spots that individuals have across the board. So when they're not aware of their strengths and weaknesses, individuals, then they make decisions that are outside their abilities, and that can lead to failure. That's just one example. So personally speaking, for me, in my position with the people that I work with professionally, I tend to be a very direct person. I say things that are on my mind, and I deliver the message the way that I feel like delivering it in that moment. That is a weakness, because let me just address that, because not everybody can handle that type of, that kind of, how do you call that? That kind of disposition or that character, right? People are sensitive. And so I had to recognize that while this is a good quality to have, because you have to be able to speak your mind and be direct, I also had to be able to recognize the situation and the people that are involved in the way that I'm addressing them, right? So because I'm in a leadership position within my organization, I have to be mindful of each personality that I'm working with. And on a personal level, individualistic level, I have to recognize I got to be mindful of how I deliver this to this person because they're more sensitive to this and that and whatever, right? And so it's okay to be assertive and direct, but how you deliver the message is also equally as important. So it's about being aware of being situational in that moment, a situational leadership, right?
But again, it's like when you're saying about, your blind spot is the fact that, yes, you recognize in yourself, right? Because you're aware of the fact that you deliver the message right away. Like, this is how I deliver the message, right? Now, what you're saying that your blind spot is that sometimes you don't recognize, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to understand, that the blind spot is that sometimes I'm not fully aware of how sensitive somebody else is.
Yeah.
In different situations, right? Now, yes, okay. I understand that dynamic, right? That yes, but you are aware of it, right? You recognize, yes, I'm an abrasive person.
It's something that I have discovered as I've gotten older. Yeah, I didn't care earlier in my life, So,
but the idea is to bring that portion up to perspective, right? So, the blind spot in you is that you say that you recognize and you addressed was how being abrasive affects other individuals. Is that what you're trying to say? My
delivery with certain individuals can be abrasive for them.
Okay.
Because people are all different. I mean, it's happened in our relationship. Let's just be honest. There's been messages that I've delivered and you just been like, dang, can you just be easy? Like, why'd you have to say it like that? And it's offensive. It can be offensive.
Okay.
And it took a lot for me to step back and just kind of analyze, how am I addressing Omar in this particular situation? And how can I better communicate with him to drive the message without taking anything away from myself as a person, because what I feel and what I think is important. And that has to be, you can't just ignore that, because then you're just ignoring your own being, and that's not okay. But you have to be able to deliver a message to your significant other or to people that you work with in a way that is conducive, that you get the dividends come from that. You know what I mean?
And what will be those dividends then?
The dividends is if I deliver a message to you that, let's just say, for example, because I haven't had to deliver a message in a long time, but if I say something like, if I come up to you and I'm like, your clothes are all over the freaking bedroom. This is driving me crazy. It drives me mad. It gets me really pissed when you don't put them in the hamper. I don't know if I just said it like that, but if I said, it'd be really helpful if you could just put your clothes in the hamper. This is probably not a good example, but there is a difference in that tone. There's a difference in the situation. You might have just gotten off of work and I just address you in a way that is abrasive. You're going to be like, Jesus Christ, relax, woman, and that's happened.
Okay.
But I think that when I come to you and I approach you in a way that, it's really helpful to me when you take all your clothes and put them in the thing and, hey, are those clothes dirty? Do you mind putting them away? Adiosing that stuff or whatever. Then for you, it's sort of more light-hearted and it's a way for you to deal with, I got to pick up that stuff. Yeah, I can do that. No problem. I want to help you. I want to help you. You know what I mean? Because I'm asking you to help me.
So that in essence is
instead of telling you that you're a loser because your clothes are all over the room.
So then in this particular case, what you're referring to is tact.
Yeah.
That we have a blind spot when it comes to the tactfulness as to our desire to have our voices heard, to doing what we want to do, to be ourselves, but also we don't want to do that at the expense of others. So the blind spot that we want is to use tactfulness.
Yeah, and not losing our identity.
Without using that identity and not taking away from somebody else.
Yeah, it's an example. It's one example.
Okay.
Just using a personal sort of scenario, you know what I mean? That's important.
So what else?
So other common blind spots that leaders and individuals have is overconfidence.
Okay.
that was the other thing I was going to allude to when you were talking about your example, because I think that when you're just focusing on the good aspects of yourself or the positive aspects of yourself and not your weaknesses and your blind spots or the things that you're not aware of, then you become confident, because I don't think that we particularly will focus on our weaknesses. We won't think we have those weaknesses because we have all these things that are so great about us, and that leads to overconfidence.
Yeah, but it's also, and this is kind of like when I do have to do a little bit of a bit of a pushback, right? Because it's that particular idea of overconfidence, it's true. You know, sometimes we get a little over cocky, and then we start thinking, we can't do no wrong, right? And I when I think of this, right, I think about Marcus Aurelius, right, having somebody walking around behind his back, reminding him, "You're just a human. You're just a human. You're just a human." Yeah. Even though he was the emperor of the most powerful civilization in the world, you're just a human. You're just a human. You're just a human. You know, because we do need to have that realization of we are just a human being, right, and to be humble and to mitigate our risks, right. But on the other flip side of that too, and this is one of the things that I feel that a lot of our the audience that we work towards and that resonate with us is the blind spot of not having enough confidence.
No, I get
to live their lives,
absolutely,
right? Because
that's what you were alluding to earlier, the duality of these things.
Because it's like it's all situational and individual wise, right? Because from my experience personally, you know, I it may seem that I'm overconfident, but I'm in reality I'm underconfident. Like sometimes I struggle with my confidence in the individual that I am, what I've done, what I've been through, the person that I would like to be. You know, that's always been a battle. And we always are battling that particular idea of self-worth in ourselves and within our capacity of performing something. So it's the blind spot is it's either you're using too little of that confidence, or you're using too much of it. And either one could be problematic.
Absolutely. Because I think and that's a great example. But I think that when you if you're trying to have a balance, right, of mitigating the too little confidence and overconfidence, right? When you're trying to mitigate that and balance that out, that's one thing. But when you know that you have little confidence and you overestimate in overconfidence, then that can be off-putting to people. Because I have people in my organization that I work with right now who clearly, it's very clear that they have very little self-confidence in many areas of their professional and personal life, and they bring it into the workplace in a way that is way over the top confidence, like dude, or dudette, don't stop. You got to stop this, because it comes across as so, it's just too overcoming for people. You know what I mean? To deal with, because they're like, this guy, it comes across as cockiness. It comes across. So you're compensating in overconfidence for your weaknesses or for your little confidence. Yeah. And that's where you have to have a delicate balance in my opinion. Yeah.
And that's like understanding these things about you, because it's hard to consider yourself overconfident, right? Because when you are, and typically when you have to be humbled. Something happens to humble you. Yeah. Right? Because it's very seldom that a person that has high confidence will humble themselves.
And sometimes
because they believe because they need to have that belief.
They're so confident that they don't even see that they can be humbled by something.
And unless something goes wrong, because there is something to be said about having a lot of confidence. Yeah. Because you achieve things, you go from there. But there's also that it's kind of like those when you were a little kid, right? And you were playing outside, and you were doing like a little stunt, and then you take it to the next level, and then you take it to the next level.
Then you get hurt.
And then it's like, but you took it to the next level and you landed. So he's like, yeah, I can do this. And then you take it to the next level, and that's when everything goes like boom. And you're like, oh man. But you need that push to be able to do that. Now, there are things in which, you could think of. I remember this fighter. I remember watching this fight, right? And it was Adrian Broner and Carlos Maidana. Yeah, Maidana and Broner. It was a boxing fight.
Okay,
And Broner just started getting overly confident, mocking him, like dry humping him and doing all this stuff.
Oh, wow. I don't remember this.
Yeah, it's like it's out there. You could watch it. He was like very overconfident, and Maidana ended up knocking him out.
Oof.
And because in those are scenarios in which you need to state the objective course, as to what your task is and what your goal is,
and that's a healthy level of confidence when you can stay the course.
Yeah, but he completely was blinded by his cockiness and his arrogance, right?
And that leads to bad decision making.
Yeah,
obviously,
and then not so much being blindsided, but just being knocked out. It's like it's like
you got knocked.
you got it's like he's got knocked out because it's like there's that level of arrogance that there's a line between being really confident and becoming arrogant. He surpassed that line. But at the same token, it came to bite him because his goal was to win the fight. It's like the same thing with Mayweather. Mayweather is one of the greatest boxers of all time, but he stays the course. He knows that he needs to win the fight. He talks a lot before and after,
but during the fight,
he's focused.
Yeah, I mean he looks confident. You know what I mean? And that's okay.
But again, it's like his goal is to win that fight.
Yeah.
Right? He is to win that fight. And then afterwards he talks and he feels people don't like him much. But again, in his profession and his goal to win that fight, he is supremely confident, but he's not arrogant about it.
Right.
Not in the ring.
Right.
Not in the ring.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think that that kind of like, and again, it's like, I know that he's a controversial person, but when it comes to his profession, and what he does in between the ring, he's supremely balanced and understands his blind spots.
Right.
So then what else do we?
Another blind spot, I have 4 total, is inflexibility or rigidity. So people, leaders, individuals who are not open to change have a blind spot in understanding their team members' needs and in their personal lives, other spouse, significant others, children, family members' needs and concerns. And this can lead to a lack of trust and poor communication.
Yeah. I think this is the one that unconscious bias really kind of like fits in, right? Yeah. Because you believe a certain point about a certain group of people, a certain whatever, and then you are so inflexible of seeing past the stereotypes, right? Past the singular from the plural, like you're not able to see that. So you go and you create a group to be this certain way, and then you're not changing that. And that's one thing in which the unconscious bias, I see that, right? When it comes to race, when it comes to gender, when it comes to your experiences of dealing with a certain type of individual, because not two things are always alike, even in a group. Yeah. That's one thing. The other part that I see this, and this is kind of like playing to the detriment of our nation, is in our politics, right? There's so much rigidity and inflexibility in compromising, in finding like really good solutions to the collective good. And our leaders have failed us. Like in reality, they really have, because they have really kind of like battened down the hatches on their identity politics, on their individual politics, on their ideologies, that the lack of flexibility is bringing the nation to a really interesting point, So then what are we going to do? Are you so inflexible that you feel that if you compromise, you actually are losing identity?
It seems that way. I think that's the message that's being driven.
Yeah, like it seems that way. Just but what we're missing, we're blinded to the reality that this inflexibility is going to cost our nation in the long run.
And it's interesting that we are so, we talked about this in another episode where we talked about being so rigid in what we think and what we believe, doesn't expose us to opportunities that may be beneficial for ourselves and for our growth and our development and for the betterment of our relationships, both professionally and personally. And I think that is a huge, it's a huge consequence, negative consequence, because I think that when you close yourself off to these things, you don't have the experience of life.
Correct.
And of experiencing that, your favorite word, of achieving that bliss, of being open and not having this set, like some people are just like, I just don't do this on Friday nights. I'm just not going to do it on Friday nights. And that's not it. But imagine if they went for a walk on a Friday night at the beach, one thing they wouldn't do. It's a silly example, but imagine about opening up the just how you feel and your well-being, and you know what I mean?
And from two standpoints, from the individual standpoint, right? In order for us to change, right? Because we get in our mental grooves, we're creatures of habitual happenstance, right? Because it all depends on the habit. So to change that habit, to have flexibility, to be able to transform and create very neuroplasticity in our brains to be able to try new things and all that stuff. Like I'm dealing with something like that right now. That is that I had to recognize that was a blind spot. I'm like, oh my God, I thought myself to be a flexible person, but an opportunity is coming up and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if I should do this. So I'm very, very inflexible, but I'm being pushed also to kind of like try this stuff and then go from there. But you think that you are and you think that you're open, but are you truly open to like the possibilities of the other individuals or other circumstances that stuff? And then we are seeing as a collective, we are seeing the results of that inflexibility playing out in our political arenas at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And so the final blind spot that's the most common, and this is not an exhaustive list because there are many more blind spots. So these are the most common ones, is a lack of empathy.
Okay. And what do you mean by that one?
So leaders who lack empathy, leaders and individuals who lack empathy may have a blind spot in understanding their team members' needs and concerns. This can lead to a lack of trust and poor communication. So I read the wrong one for inflexibility. Missed opportunity, but we talked about missed opportunities and things like that. But I think that what happens is that when you don't have, I had a situation happen just recently where I had somebody come to me in good faith, asking me about my opinion. They know that I studied leadership, so they kind of value my opinion. And the thing that this person asked was, do you think that my response to this individual in terms of their need to know more information was appropriate? So I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I basically said, well, I don't think that you actually, I think it's really important for you to reflect on your interaction with this person. One of the things that I had mentioned to this individual long ago was that it's important for you to manage by walking around, like MBWA, right? Manage by MBWA, yeah. And manage by walking around. Yeah. And that's I learned it in my master's degree. It's really important because what happens when you're in a leadership position is sometimes you're at Mount Olympus and you don't get to see. You don't see what's happening with your people. And when you establish relationships with people, and you know their dog's name, or what they were sick over spring break, or they lost a family member or something. When you know these things about these people and you can be there to listen, that's showing empathy and sort of relating to their situation, right? Yeah. And that's, a lot of people confuse that with, I say hi to them every day. It's not the same thing. You got to get to know your people. You got to connect, right? Yeah. And so when you have a lack of empathy, people, when you're not connecting with people, you're not establishing a relationship. So there's no trust and there's no communication because they feel like, well, my leader isn't interested in me, or my family member or whatever isn't interested. They don't call me and ask me how I'm doing. They just don't care. There's no empathy there. And that causes concern. And it's a huge blind spot. Because when you can have relationships with people like that, you get more from those individuals in both ways. Yes. You know what I mean? And I think that is grounds for productive relationships and productive work environments.
And you know what the interesting is, right? We're living in an area right now in which people are very dissatisfied in their work environments, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of us are really dissatisfied, very angst, very heavy, for a lot of different pressures, right? I mean, I think there's always been the case that most people have, because work is hard, right?
Yeah, of course.
But also at the same token, we are moving in a direction in which I was watching a little clip from Joe Rogan's episode about Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were talking about the fact that people are looking for experiences, right? Like to experience life, like genuinely experience things in life, right? And there is no more powerful thing from a leader standpoint, right? In which you are creating an environment in which people feel engaged, a sense of belonging, which is one of our primordial, primitive.
Yeah, it's a need.
Craving.
Yeah,
it's one of those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like the sense of belonging to something. And if you are at work and you feel that your contributions are acknowledged, that you're being not primarily financially, yes, but also in that emotional satisfying, that emotional aspect of contribute that you're contributing to something,
to a greater purpose,
and that your opinion matters, right?
Yeah.
Like when that happens, you get a different person in whatever it is that you're doing. You get a different person in your partner. When they feel that that you guys are doing things together, you get a different sense in your family. You get a different sense in your community. You get a different sense and exponentially, you get a different sense in the world when people are attached and bound to something.
Yeah,
and that creates a greater sense of sympathy when you, as a person in charge or as a leader, or someone responsible for others, right? That you are able to create an environment in which people feel safe and comforted, and so that they're able to thrive.
Right.
That is kind of like one of the beautiful things about leadership, that and recognizing that blind spot of not having empathy, how that could benefit not so much the environment that you are working with, but it affects your bottom line too in a positive way, because the more productive and the better your employees feel, the more production, the more impact, the greater income revenues or whatever it is that your outcomes might be, you could actually get that.
Are affected, definitely.
In a positive
way.
manner. Yeah,
I agree. So those are the blind spots. Those are the most common. There's there's an exhaustive list. I mean, couldn't talk about all of those in the time that we have, but we do have 4 strategies for how people,
strategies for people,
leaders and individuals, because we focus on the individual on a soul's quest, and in addressing their blind spots. So the first thing is to seek feedback. Okay. Leaders and individuals should actively seek feedback from their team members, peers, and mentors and family members to gain a better understanding of their blind spots. Yeah. So that can be done very simply in what is called a 360-degree
assessment.
360-degree assessment.
Yeah.
And that's a good one, because that's basically going to a subordinate, somebody who's your equal, and somebody who's above you, and asking them to give you feedback on their leadership. I've had that happen to me very much so in my current leadership in my organization, and it has been very, very valuable on different levels. Whether that person will listen or not is irrelevant, but there have been many instances where the things that I have given feedback on, this is when I chose to be direct and assertive and say, you want to hear the truth? Because I can lie to you, but and this person has been very gracious and very, very accepting about it. In some cases, I just don't agree with that. And I'm like, okay, that's no problem. You just asked me to give you some feedback, but it is so important. And I have asked for feedback myself, And one of the things that I've gotten back is, you can be, that was one of my that's where I got it. Like, you're just very direct, and sometimes your delivery stings. That's exactly the word that was used. Yeah. And I can see that, because even with you, I've delivered messages and you're like, Jesus, a little kindness goes a long way,
Yeah. I have a friend of mine, Mike Sancho. He says this all the time. It's like, feedback is a gift. Feedback is a gift.
That's good.
And it is. Because I love the 360 assessment,
I do
right?
too.
And you could use it because it's beneficial to your own personal development.
Yeah.
Right. Because the ones that I've seen done is what can I do more of? What I could do less of? What can I continue to do? That's very simple question, and it's just very three very simple questions, right?
There's a couple of variations of it, but that's a good one.
Do more of, do less of, continue to do. Those three things, and you can learn a lot from the perspective, and from that perspective. But it is a gift, because then you're able to identify, I do this really, really well, but I know that perhaps I could take this particular thing and tweak it so this area becomes better.
Right.
And also you gotta whenever you get feedback, you gotta make sure you take it with a grain of salt too, because you also have to understand, like, who are you asking and why are you asking them.
Well, that's why you have to be careful about who you're asking and why you're asking. Also, you have to be able to be mindful of the fact that everybody has an opinion. You know what I mean? And so you have to be able to balance the feedback with the feedback of other people. You know what I mean? And sort of mitigate that so that it works for you and benefits you. You know what I mean? So the second strategy is to practice self-reflection.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do.
That's a huge one. Yeah. So that's taking the time to just be with yourself, reflect on your own behavior and decision-making processes to identify your blind spots. So one of the ways that I find is the best way to do that is to just kind of sit by myself when I think through my day and I've come across a tough situation or whatever, where I had maybe a negative experience that elicited this thought process. I like to write it down, and there's moments where something will happen where I feel disrupted internally, and I write it down and I'm like, okay, let me think about this. Am I wrong in what I said? Am I overreacting by what I said? Or, I'm going to go into this meeting and I'm going to go in with a better attitude because I need to be, things like that. And I notice when I write them down, it's really helpful because I can reflect on those things and just kind of go back to it and say, well, this is how this came out as a result of addressing this blind spot. Yeah.
I mean, reflection is always good, just to be able to look back at a situation, look about, and ask those 3 questions
to yourself.
What can I do? What can I do more of based on this situation? What can I do less of? And what can I continue to do?
Exactly.
And that's a simple strategy that you could use while you are reflecting on what you did for that particular day.
Definitely. The third strategy, which is one of my favorites, is embracing vulnerability. So I'm going to say people, both leaders and individuals who are open about their weaknesses and limitations can build trust with their team members and family members, friends, family members, and create a more positive environment, both professionally and personally.
Yeah.
So one great person, I'm big on her books and whatnot, is Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about vulnerabilities. For those people who want to learn more about that, I think that it's derogatory for a lot of people. I can't be vulnerable. This is I'm at work or whatever. I can't be vulnerable. Even in a personal relationship and families, you don't want to be vulnerable because you don't want to be taken advantage of. You want to come up. You want to come out on top. But being vulnerable isn't about those things. And we could talk a whole episode on being vulnerable.
Yeah, and the thing is like there's 2 things that I do want to say about vulnerability. Number one is the fact that yes, most people don't want to be vulnerable because we're still in the mammalian mentality of survival of the fittest.
Yes,
right? So
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so we're still in that mentality that I cannot be vulnerable because people
will take advantage of me.
And there's a certain truth to that. There's a truth to that. I mean, that's, you can't deny that. That the way that you mitigate that is by not going all in. It's like there has to be a reciprocity, and I learned this in the last few months. Like you have to be vulnerable, but you also have to be able to make sure that you're getting a reciprocity. Because why would I be vulnerable with somebody that really doesn't want nothing to do with me?
Correct.
Why am I going to continue to be vulnerable in a situation in which I'm no longer accepted?
Exactly.
Why am I going to put myself to that? And you have to be able to mitigate that. But when you find an environment that is a welcoming environment that opens you up and gives you that sense of belonging, and you get that sense of belonging, that it is okay for you to feel safe and be vulnerable and put your stuff out there. Being a leader is a lonely thing. It's a lonely island. Right? Because you have to be able to do all these things for yourself, and then be able to do that for other people as well, which is a very challenging thing to do.
I agree. I would say, again, just to emphasize, if anybody's interested in learning more about vulnerability and the benefits of it,
we'll have another episode.
And I think that Brene Brown's books are amazing, and I think they're they're super easy to read, and they really give good insight into being vulnerable. And
we're not getting any kickbacks from this promotion.
No, I wish I was.
All right, well then stop.
All right, and the final strategy is to get outside help, and what I mean by that is that individuals can seek life coaches, consultants who specialize in leadership development and even therapy if it's really that serious. You know, it doesn't have to be therapy. I think life coaching, somebody like yourself who does life coaching and sort of talking out your goals and what it is that you want to come out with in that session, in your moments together, right, is a good way to self-identify our blind spots, because it's my understanding that your job is not to identify our blind spots, but to help bring that out. Yeah. And I think that's a great tool for that. So if anybody wants a life coach, you can reach out to Omar.
So, but yeah, I do appreciate that, because a lot of the answers, again, this is kind of like goes back to that line. There's nothing I don't know, just hasn't come to me
exactly.
yet.
Nika
Try
Costa.
to remember what
Nika
I chose
Costa.
to forget.
You put that YouTube video on this episode.
I do, but it's like, but the idea is that we do have a lot of our answers, and we do have a lot of our stuff. It's just being able to really dig deep, and then being able to find that place within us,
and not being afraid of what we're going to discover. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Comment below with your thoughts and additional ideas. And remember to stay connected by sharing and subscribing.